Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special episode of FIDF Live in honor of Holocaust Remembrance Day, Yom HaShoah. Tonight, we are meeting with Professor Ariel Cohen. Professor Cohen is a Holocaust survivor originally from France and now living here in Jerusalem, in Israel. Professionally, Professor Cohen worked for many years as a professor at Hebrew University here in Jerusalem in the field of astronomy and physics of the atmosphere. He was in charge of courses that deciphered satellite images to determine the best paths for flight. On a more casual note, he is a big fan of basketball. And before we move forward, I just want to thank you, Professor Cohen, for allowing us into your home and for sharing your story with us. On behalf of myself and all of our viewers, I want to say how meaningful it is to speak with a survivor himself and hearing this type of story directly from the source. Also joining us is Professor Cohen's granddaughter, Ronnie, who is a lone soldier in the IDF Home Front Command, and along with her, some other soldiers from the platoon and members of the IDF ensemble. This type of gathering that we're doing right now is known in Hebrew as Zikaron Basalon, living room memories, and it's somewhat of a tradition here in Israel around the time of Yom HaShoah. So, shalom, Professor Ariel. It's an honor and privilege to be speaking with you. Just for our viewers at home, I'm going to give some background about your story. Your father, Leo, was born in Germany, and in 1933, around the time of the Nazi uprising, your father's family moved from Germany to France. And your mother's family, that would be Rachel, they also moved from Germany to France. They were married in France, and in 1938, your sister Naomi was born. Now, your father was a Zionist. He was an active member of the community. He was a leader in the Tzofim, the Scouts. He was a role model and a hero to many. And I just want to ask you to describe him from the perspective of a son.
First of all, I'm very privileged to be here today with my granddaughter, who is certainly my own hero. And it gives me an opportunity to tell you and also my granddaughter the background of my family.
In 1939, when the war broke out in Germany, your father was drafted into the French Foreign Legion, and he was sent to Algeria.
That's right.
A few months later, you were born. He wasn't home for your birth.
That's right.
But then in May of 1940, Germany occupied France, the Nazi occupation. Your father fell ill, came back home, saw his son, that would be you, for the first time, and almost immediately your family moved to the town in France of Moissac. That's how I pronounce it?
Yes, Moissac.
So in Moissac, you mentioned responsibility. They became members, your parents, of the French Jewish underground. And we see right there the sense of commitment to keeping the community safe, even in hard times, rising up against an authoritarian power. And this sense of responsibility, I do want to point out, I think has been passed down not just to you, but to your granddaughter, Ronnie, who is now choosing to serve as a lone soldier in the IDF. So what is your response to that?
Well, first of all, his brothers, one of them is also very famous, was very famous in Israel. He was a judge in the Supreme Court by the name of Herman Chaim Cohen. And they all immigrated or made an aliyah to Israel, to Eretz Israel. But he decided that he became in charge of hundreds of young orphans, and he decided that he could not leave them. So by choice, they stayed in France, and for the first year, during the first year, the southern part of France was not occupied by the Nazis, by the Gestapo. They had an agreement with the French government, which was also inclined to the German. But they gave the opportunity for many Jews to escape from the Nazis, at least for a year, into Moissac and afterwards into Lautrec, where there were houses that were given to the scouts by Baron Rothschild. So one thing was forbidden. The thing that was forbidden is to make services inside the houses, because the synagogues were not allowed even in the southern parts of France. So therefore, everything took place outside. And I wanted to show you how even the choir that, there was a choir here that he conducted, and they were singing in the forest, in the middle of the forest. They were going out at night, and I know that he took me out also, because from there I can recall some of the songs. And they did it in the middle of the forest, watching the sky with the moving clouds towards Eretz Israel with their dreams.
Now, so we happen to have an original recording of one of your father's songs. You mentioned that your mother taught them music. He was a Zionistic singer, right, a musician, and we're going to actually hear one of those recordings right now with your permission, if that's okay.
Definitely.
And that was, of course, Avinu Malkeinu, our Father in heaven, which any of us who have been to a Yom Kippur service. What is it like for you to hear your father's voice, the group he was in, right now?
Well, it is certainly very emotional, and I must tell you that we are singing this song many years, almost every Saturday, because it gives us, again, returned us to the nights we were watching him conducting the choir.
And the song, of course, that we heard is Avinu Malkeinu, our Father in heaven. And we're now going to hear a more modern rendition of that song from the IDF ensemble.
אבינו מלכנו, חננו בנינו. אבינו מלכנו, חננו בנינו, כי אין בנו מעשים. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד והושיענו. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד והושיענו. אבינו מלכנו, חננו בנינו. אבינו מלכנו, חננו בנינו, כי אין בנו מעשים. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד והושיענו. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד. עשה עמנו צדקה וחסד והושיענו. אבינו מלכנו.
I'm so excited from listening to the way you performed, and I wanted also to share with you another song of the choir, and in which my father is the leading voice. And I want first to listen to the music and then to describe in a couple of sentences my feeling when I'm hearing this song. Years after this song was recorded, I can still feel as if my father is standing next to me. I can feel as if I'm talking to him, because his voice is so clear, and that's something that I cannot tell you how much it is exciting to me.
At what point your father and your mother actually made a decision that it was too dangerous to keep living in Moissac, and they decided to move you, the family, to the forest? And I'm wondering if we can just hear any memories you have of that period of your childhood when you lived in the forest.
Now, we had to move from one place to another to hide ourselves all the time. And all the children in France were forced to have a name tag in case we are arrested by the Gestapo. And this was after 1942, when the Gestapo, they also conquered the southern part of France. We had to hide ourselves. They had to catch 1,000 Jews a day. This was the order. So they were moving around. Now, we had a name tag on us, but my name was no more Ariel Cohen, but Adrien Collin. It had to be a French name. So, and this is Adrien Collin can be changed very easily from the original tag that I had with my name, Ariel Cohen. And this tag really has Adrien Collin. And since my father wanted us to keep the Shabbos, we decided, or they decided for us, to be evangelists, that they keep, the Christians that keep the Shabbos. So, and we were instructed not to talk and not to dance, not to sing at all, because we were singing all the time the songs of the choir. So when we moved around, we had to be very careful not to use any Hebrew word or any sign that we were Jews. Now, my father was a very well-known educator. He instructed Hebrew religion to all the orphans that were gathered there, hundreds of them. And when he had time, he also taught me to read and write when I was 3 years old. Now, I have even a proof that I can show you later on that I was certainly able to do that when I was so young. So he didn't lose any moment. He was teaching them, being a member, a leader in the French Jewish underground called Maquis. And they were a part of all the entire French underground. But he had a very active role there. So most of his time he was not at home. When he came back, he used all any time that he had to teach us, and this way I was able to read and write in French.
Could you celebrate holidays, Pesach, Passover? How was that celebrated when you were on the run in the forest?
Well, we had this actually took place a couple of months before the southern part of France was captured by the Nazis, when there was still the Vichy government was still in charge. So my father remembered by heart that how to bake the matzah. So we went to the forest. I have a beautiful picture that he was holding me to watch how this was done. And a group of young people, they knew how to bake it, and they baked it exactly. The duff couldn't be baked more than 18 minutes. So and also he wrote by memory a Haggadah. This is a handwritten Haggadah that he wrote, and this was given to all the participants. And we had the Leil HaSeder out in the field, and this is something that he would not allow to forget, and he wanted to make sure that we celebrate Passover in the forest, but with the Haggadah and with matzot in the middle of the war.
Your story took a turn when you were 4 years old in 1944. Your little sister Aviva is born, and your family decided to cross the border into Switzerland for the purpose of making a journey to Eretz Yisrael. And you have a memory of waiting for that train. Tell me what that memory is.
The first experience, my father, he was in charge of a group of youngsters that that had to cross the borders of Spain in order to join the armed forces in Israel, Haganah or Etzel. And there were several dozens of young people that the underground decided that my father had to lead through the borders to Spain. But he didn't want to leave his family in France. So he brought us to the train station in order to bring us to Switzerland, to the border of Switzerland. But somehow he had the feeling that it can become his last time with me. So he took his talit and covered him and myself, and we started to pray near the train station. And my mother told him that he had to finish the prayer because the train had to leave. So he didn't want to stop it before we ended the prayer. And by the time that we ended the prayer, the train left. Luckily, 2 hours later, there was another train going to the border of Switzerland. So we were brought to that train. And when we arrived to the border, and a very famous hero by the name of Marianne Cohn, also a member of the underground, was receiving us in order to show us the way where we could cross the border. When we arrived, she was pale, totally white. Her face became extremely pale because she was sure that we didn't make it. Why? She heard that the train that we missed was stopped by the Gestapo, and all the Jews were taken out and executed. So when we didn't arrive with that train, and the non-Jews told her the story, what happened in the middle of the way, she was sure that we were killed.
So at this point, Professor Cohen, you, your two sisters, and your mother are in Switzerland. Your father, however, is back in France to help more children cross over the border. On July 26, 1944, you and your family receive a letter from the transport camp Drancy. Your father had been caught by the Gestapo. He had sent a letter with a doctor who then brought that letter to you around the time of your 4th birthday. Can you just tell us about this letter and what it meant to you to read it?
Well, I can show you the letter. This letter, and when you see this letter, you can see he wrote it so that I could read it, which is an excellent proof that he was successful in teaching me how to read and write. When I was, this is my 4th birthday. And he wrote it in such a way that I could read it. So this is, for me, it's, I cannot describe to you how important this letter is to me. And maybe instead of reading it in French, which could have been easier for me, let me read it for you, translated to English. My dear Ariel, in another week, you'll have your party. I really wanted to be with you, to kiss you, and to play with you. Now, all I'm able to do is to give you this note, this small sign of life. Hope to see you soon. Lots of sweet kisses. Your dad. But he did not return back. And since he was transported from Drancy to Auschwitz, where he was murdered with several other people from that transport, which is a very well-known transport, the last big transport called Transport 77. You must know that he missed by 7 days the soldiers and the army, the American army, conquering Paris, and Lautrec, Drancy, was next to Paris. And he would have been liberated from that camp 7 days later. And he was murdered in Auschwitz 2 weeks before the forces came and rescued this camp.
For all of the amazing things you told us about your father, when he was killed, he was a mere 32 years old, quite young. And it is here today. One of the reasons it is here today is because of the IDF, and that is the bridge to the next part of our story, which is your granddaughter, Ronnie, Sergeant Ronnie, who is in the home front command of the IDF. She's chosen to be a part of the defense of the state of Israel. What do you feel? I can kind of guess and see it already in your eyes, but what do you feel and think about that?
Well, first of all, I want to emphasize that she volunteered. She was just graduated summa cum laude from UCLA, one of the most respected universities all over the world. And at that point, she felt an obligation, just like other members of her family. She felt obligated that she wanted to contribute to the Israel IDF. And she volunteered and came to Israel. And for me, this is a pure heroism. And I'm so happy that you managed to be now a sergeant in charge of several soldiers, and no better contribution to your state, Israel, to the state of the Jewish people, can be made than your contribution.
Well, Sergeant Ronnie, tell us a little bit about yourself, age, background, just so we can know you, and then I want to hear a little bit more about your relationship to your grandfather's story. But first, just the basics about you.
I am 24, which is a bit old for Army time. I finished college and then decided that I wanted to draft. Yeah, I have a degree from UCLA in English literature, which I'm very proud of. I loved every part of UCLA and every part of university.
So what made you decide to come join the IDF?
I was definitely, I grew up for a while in Israel, and then I moved with my family. And I had kind of at some point developed a very strong desire to rekindle a sense of belonging here. I realized that that sense of belonging was something that I couldn't take for granted, and that it wouldn't come on its own, that I had to sort of take ownership of my Jewish identity and my Israeli identity. And I wanted to take responsibility for it.
Your grandfather's story, how is it to hear it once again today, and how has that impacted you in your decision to join and your experience in the IDF now?
It's absurdly humbling to have listened to the story, and not for the first time, of course, but to sit here and listen to the story and to in any way be tied to that is unfathomable to me. I think growing up, I felt that my family's legacy is impossible to live up to. Papa Leo was a hero to me, and it was passed down, like, to my grandfather, to my father, and the way that they raised me. And it's something that I've always been driven by, and that understanding of how do you live up to something that's impossible to live up to. And I think that what I took away from these stories growing up, which again, all these stories were a driving force in my upbringing and in the person that I wanted to be. I decided to take it to a place of doing whatever you can, like wherever you're placed in life, just this understanding that you have the ability and the responsibility to stand up for other people, to take responsibility for other people. And I think the part of the story that really hits me is the fact that he helped his family cross the border, and then to be torn between that personal responsibility and another responsibility to your people and a social responsibility. it's an impossible choice. But I think the choice was made with love.
Professor Cohen, how is it for you to see Ronnie sitting in uniform next to you, as well as her fellow soldiers that she is now in charge of? And what message do you have to her, to them, and to the people of Israel?
Well, I think I have two messages. One message is that this family, my family, is a very good example that one can start from scratch after the war. We came to Eretz Israel with nothing at all, not even a suitcase. No money at all. And we really started from scratch, but we made it. There are several people like me and like my family that raised later on a very proud, large family, well educated, and having much more than only our closest one. So my message is the first message is that this is a lesson that we should learn. If we trust ourselves, if we live in a good supporting environment, then we can all make it from ever how low we had to start from. And my second message is that nowadays we know that we are surrounded by so many people that hate the Jews outside Israel and even within Israel. They hate us, knowing that with you, this time we can defend ourselves. And IDF, where you serve, is really the strongest part in history, I would say. Now, we are stronger than them. We will overcome.
Professor Cohen, once again, thank you so much for spending time with us and for allowing us into your home for this Zikaron Basalon, this living room memory. And Sergeant Ronnie and your soldiers, thank you for sharing this time with us as well. Let us take inspiration and hope from Professor Ariel Cohen and his family and their story. As the poet Chana Senech writes in one of her most beloved songs, Eli, Eli, my God, I pray that these may never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of man. We're now going to hear a rendition of the song from the IDF Ensemble.
שלא ייגמר לעולם החול והים רשרוש של המים ברק השמיים תפילת האדם החול והים
On behalf of everyone at FIDF Live, thank you so much for spending time with us tonight, and we invite you to join us once again for our Yom HaZikaron episode, Israel's Memorial Day, May 3rd, 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Laila Tov.